It's a skirt and a pair of shorts. It's the free Skort pattern from Mood Society. I chose this fun cotton canvas as the pattern recommends medium to heavy weight wovens. We'll be sewing this pattern from start to finish, adding that front flap, the side zipper, and the facing. This is a great summer pattern so you have the feminine flair of a skirt with the movement freedom of shorts. Gotta love it. Let's sew it now. Before I place the front and front side pieces right sides together, I'm going to finish those side edges that are going to be attached. Now I'll place my front and front side pieces right sides together and pin the corresponding seam. Sew with a 1/2 inch seam allowance and press the seam open. Then we'll repeat for the opposite front and front side pieces. Now for both of these front pieces, I'm going to finish this crotch area. Then I'll place my front pieces right sides together and pin along the crotch area. Sew with a 1/2 inch seam allowance and press the seam open. I've marked the dart onto the back piece, now I'll pin in place. Sew from the top to the bottom, leaving thread tails at the point so I can tie them in knots. Repeat for both back darts. And I've pressed my darts toward their corresponding side seams. Now I'm going to finish the curved center back edges. Then I'll place these pieces right sides together and pin the center back. Sew at 1/2 inch and press the seam open. I've gone ahead and finished the side and bottom edges of the front panel piece. Now for the longer of the two sides, I'm going to press that edge to the wrong side by 1/2 inch, as well as pressing the bottom edge to the wrong side by 1/2 inch as well. Now for the folded side and bottom edges, I'm going to edge stitch right along my finishing stitches for that L shape. Now for this shorter finished side, I'm going to draw myself a stitching line 1/2 inch away from the finished edge. Here are the bottom edges of my front pant piece, which I'm going to fold and hem in the same way as we just did for the front panel. Finishing the raw edges, then pressing them to the wrong side by 1/2 inch and edge stitching in place. Place the line that you created directly on top of the seam on the right front pant piece. So my drawn line sits right on top of the seam line. Pin in place from top to bottom. Then we'll sew along our transferred line from the top to the bottom. Then we can flip the front panel over the stitching line that we just created and give that a good press. So now that the wrong side of our front panel piece sits on the right side of the front pant piece, we're going to edge stitch along the front panel side, sewing the front panel to the front pant piece, from top to bottom. I've gone ahead and hemmed the back short piece in the same way as I did for the front. And I've also finished the side edges, as well as finishing the side edges of the front short piece. Now I'll place my front and back short pieces right sides together at the right side seam and pin in place. Sew with a 1/2 inch seam allowance and press the seam open. For the left side seam, I'll place my front and back pieces right sides together, and I'm going to mark where the bottom zipper stop will land on the wrong side of the fabric. The top zipper stop should be a 1/2 inch to 5/8 of an inch away from the top raw edge of the skirt. Now that I have the bottom zipper stop marked onto the wrong side of the fabric, I'm going to pin this side seam. We're going to sew from the top to the bottom with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. From the top to the point that we marked for the bottom zipper stop, we're going to sew with a basting stitch, the longest stitch on your machine. Once you get to your transferred point, backstitch to secure and sew the remainder of that seam with a regular stitch. Here's the left side seam that we just sewed, and I press the seam open. I'm going to place the right side of the zipper over the seam allowance so that the zipper teeth sit right on top of the seam line. I'm going to make sure once again that that top zipper stop begins 1/2 inch away from the top raw edge. Then I'm going to sew both sides of the zipper to the skort from the top to the bottom, pivoting along the bottom of the zipper to sew back up the opposite side. I'm going to switch to a zipper foot so I can sew close to the zipper teeth. I'm going to sew without pins here to sew close to the teeth along that top edge. As I sew, I'm just going to check the whole time to make sure that my zipper teeth are still sitting right on top of the seam line. As I was sewing the zipper and I got back up to the opposite top zipper stop, I ended up opening some of those top basting stitches so I could move the zipper slide out of the way and sew close to the top zipper stop. Now I can continue removing the remainder of the basting stitches. Now I can finish both of my inseam edges. And with front and back inseam right sides together, sew with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I've gone ahead and finished the raw edges all along the top of the skirt because my material does fray a lot. This finishing also served to baste my front flap to the front skirt. I'm also going to finish the raw edges all along the perimeter of both facing pieces. Place the front and back facing pieces right sides together, and we're going to pin the right side seam to correspond with the sewn side seam of the skirt. Sew with a 5/8 inch seam allowance and press the seam open. Place the facing right sides together with the top of the skirt so that the finished short side edge of the facing extends 1/2 inch beyond the finished zipper edge of the skirt on both zipper sides. Then we'll sew all the way around the top of the skirt with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm going to understitch the facing by turning it over the seam allowance and sewing the facing to the seam allowance underneath about 1/8 inch away from the original seam line, all the way around. Then we can turn our facing to the inside along the main seam, and we'll give that a press as well as pressing those loose short edges of the facing to the wrong side by 1/2 inch on both sides. Now for both sides of the zipper opening where I pressed those side edges to the wrong side by 1/2 inch, place those folded edges so they sit right next to the zipper teeth without obstructing the zipper. Then from the right side, I'm going to sew right in line with my zipper stitching, from top to bottom of the facing, doing this on both sides. For the opposite side seam, to secure the facing to the inside of the skirt, we're going to be stitching in the ditch. Placing a pin inside that seam so that it comes out inside the seam of the facing. Then we'll sew from the top to the bottom of the facing from the outside, stitching in that seam. Add a decorative button or a snap at the top of your flap, or you can leave it plain as I'm doing. Then your skirt is complete. Thank you for joining me for this sew along. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future sewing tutorials, and I'll see you in the next video.